Psychiatrists of Reddit, what was the most obvious attempt to fake insanity you've seen? A resident's face fell quite dramatically when I informed them the attention in ADHD doesn't mean you like attention. As someone with ADHD, always fun when people think that. I was diagnosed with that in 1993 or so, and I have never heard this. I need to get out more. You are probably just not paying attention. You aren't paying attention, I did, to the funny things going on in my mind. Had a mother come in and insist that her child had Silver Russell syndrome. You can go read on it. It's not that easy to fake, as it's a bunch of metabolic conditions mixed with congenital abnormalities. The kid was small, but not that small, around 6th percentile. He didn't weigh much, 5th percentile. All of this, with the right arm length 2 centimeters more than the left side, were borderline criteria for Silver Russell. Did genetic testing, which came back negative, but 30% of cases are negative. So the deciding factor was one of the soft criteria of hypoglycemia. Once she heard about this, she printed out 30 to 40 articles on the disease. She came back with the kid in a coma. But when the kid was in the hospital, he was never hypoglycemic. He went home, and came back in a coma a few weeks later. Again, as soon as he was eating normally at the hospital, he was never hypoglycemic. She starved her child into comas repeatedly for the diagnosis of Silver Russell. She was also a bogon, people who live off welfare and make a game out of it. By the way, she was in a wheelchair when at the hospital. Once I had enough of her bullshit and walked into the room after only knocking once. She was walking around normally and jumped into the wheelchair as soon as she saw me. I believe it was for money since in Canada/Quebec, you get money when your child has a genetic disability. God, if it was legal, I would have slapped some sense into that bitch. Do you report her? You should have. Exactly what I'm saying. I'd Poyop didn't mention that. Poor baby. Not a psychiatrist, but a secretary for a PISH ward at a VA hospital as a college student, who was also trained to be part of the takedown team, i.e. when a patient gets unruly and non-compliant, we're sent in to safely get them restrained. One day I came into work expecting it to be a normal day. I immediately hear the code over the comm system for the takedown team to come to room 3. Room 3 is the intake room and where all new patients are seen. We arrive in the room to assess the situation and there are feces spread on the walls, and a man rubbing it all over his chest, completely naked. We managed to get him restrained without too much hassle, and we are all covered in feces at this point due to him fighting us at first. We get done and him restrained and the doctor on the team asks him, "Why did you feel the need to rub feces all over?" His response: "I'm homeless, the US government won't take care of me and I want food and a place to stay. The shelters are full and I knew that I could get at least 72 hours of warmth and food by acting crazy." We gave the man a full 2-week treatment stay instead, and had the VA and Dave come in to get him housing. Literally one of the best patients I've dealt with while working there from that point forward. Even helping to calm other vets down on the floor before we had to do a takedown. It's absolutely atrocious that these veterans feel the only way they can get the help they need is to do something this extreme. Last I heard the guy was doing much better. Dave helped him get a job doing cleanup at construction sites and an apartment of his own. Edit. Forgot to add, the doctor could tell this man wasn't likely to be insane. All of his answers to questions and tests came back normal. That's when he went to rubbing feces all over because he knew without something extreme we'd have to release him. I'm glad he didn't just immediately start with the feces. I'm glad the doctors still let him stay. Did a psych placement as a student and was in a discharge meeting with this homeless guy. He was brought into the hospital because police had been called as he was threatening to jump off a bridge. He claimed depression and suicidal thoughts, which it was found out not to be. So he said he was hearing voices, which was also not true. Dude was just desperate to have shelter and food. Sad case. How do you prove that someone doesn't have depression, suicidal thoughts, or is hearing voices? You can't. People just confess they were lying. Happens very often. Same way people often confess that they might hurt themselves if released. If they genuinely wanted to die, it would be trivially easy to lie about it and then off themselves after they got out, but most of the time they confess that that's what they'll do and so stay on the ward. That is the psychiatrist's job, I guess. I did ask afterwards, and they said that he chose to stand on the side of a bridge, during the middle of the day with plenty people around who could call the police is very different to someone doing it in the middle of the night. Obviously that doesn't rule anything out, but I assume along with full assessment they deemed him to have no mental health problem. Or at least not one that required sectioning. Not a psychiatrist, but I am a psychiatric nurse. We used to have so many malingering inpatients. Homeless. Come in suicidal. Would not get out of bed for days except meals. No participation. Denied suicidal ideation for days. Doc then tries to kick them out. All of a sudden screaming about being suicidal and hearing voices. Rinse repeat X 100. We literally had people with 50+ inpatient visits. Revolving door. The system's broken. It shouldn't get to the point where they need to rely on the healthcare system for a hot meal and a warm place indoors. Come in suicidal. Would not get out of bed for days except meals. No participation. All of a sudden screaming about being suicidal and hearing voices. The former, of course, are typical symptoms of various mental illnesses. The latter is also a symptom of same illnesses. I don't see any inconsistency in this behavior that would indicate malingering. Even denial of suicidal thoughts is not unusual prior to an attempt. Couple that condition with a threat to be sent out on the street, I am not surprised if the patient has an outburst. I am sure there are other factors you didn't mention, though. There's just a real problem with the perception of mental illness, and the stigma attached to it, because symptoms may not always be obvious, or dismissed as other things. Sorry for tangent, but has anyone else heard someone say my mother, my friend was diagnosed as clinically insane? I used to hear it all the time in high school, it was trendy. I remember talking to a guy in my year about how I thought I might have bipolar and he was like, don't joke about that stuff. I'm literally clinically insane. Sometimes I go stand in the square in the middle of the city and just scream at the sky. Clinically insane is not actually a medical term recognized by the DSM-V. Insane is a legal term used to determine whether someone is psychologically fit to stand trial. As such, one is not diagnosed as clinically insane. Yeah, I know. I probably should have mentioned in my comments something about how ridiculous I thought it was. So many people lied about it though. Dozens of people at my school. Oh yeah, I remember the emo phase, too. Psych nurse back in the 90s. Multiple personality disorder was all the rage, and not true. I would regularly treat people, some of whom claimed 100+ personalities. Lol. Yes, it was trendy in the 90s. If you were convincing enough, you could find your way onto an all-expense-paid vacay to be on Springer or Sally Jesse or Maury or any of the other dozen trashy daytime talk shows from that time. Drama with that on YouTube popped up recently. Who? Trisha Patre or some shit like that started it and making fun of a mental health advocate that really has the mental health problem. And now because of the threats and hate they have received, they have tried to amend themselves and their partner has removed all video off their channel. It's horrible. I never understood why people find mental illness trendy. When I was in high school, people swore they were psychos or whatever. Then it was fake depression cause of rappers like Juice WRLD and Lil Peep. Now it seems everyone has a therapist for the sake of being different or quirky. Like people seriously suffer from these things and have trouble leading normal lives and people fake it to be cool. I think that your classmates have more credibility than you'd expect. According to ADA, anxiety disorders affect 1/8 children and teens, while depression affects 1/5 children and teens. However, they're teenagers that lack the maturity to channel their emotions in a healthy way. They're looking for a sense of belonging and relating to one another through their mental illnesses is one outlet. Of course, some may be exaggerated, but I believe those are much fewer than credible cases. My generation had emo kids, which made depression trendy, yet when I look back on it, I'm sure that most of my peers truly were suffering from depression and anxiety. I think that your point of view can even be harmful. When everybody thinks that others are faking mental illness just to gain attention, it can prevent those that are suffering to ask for help or seek treatment. Losing yourself to mental illness while being surrounded by folks that doubt you're even suffering is scary, lonely, and hopeless. All I know is that friends, classmates, and I that claimed to suffer from depression and anxiety when we were 13 are still suffering/treating our mental illnesses now that we're in our 20s and 30s. In fact, for many of us, it turned out to be more than depression and anxiety. I have friends who are bipolar, others who are schizophrenic, and I have OCD and PTSD. It wasn't a phase and we weren't simply following the trend, it was absolutely real. Rather than doubting and judging those who claim to be suffering, listen to them. Lend your ear and your kindness to these people. Chances are, they have a lot more on their plate than you would have assumed. Whether or not they are willing to share their reasons, show them compassion and warmth. Edit. I also want to add that mental illness is not a death sentence. My friends and I are leading responsible lives, holding good jobs, starting families, working towards our degrees, graduating with bachelor's and master's degrees, and even working in the field that we've been studying. A diagnosis of schizophrenia, OCD, PTSD, manic depression, BPD, etc., is not a death sentence. Most lead very rewarding, successful lives. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you have a similar story, share it in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe for more. Have a great day, or night.